Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast. Special editor's note on this particular episode. As we got into our breakdown of Gladiator, we realized that we had way too much content to be able to fit into one reasonably long episode. So what we're doing is we're going to break this episode up into two parts. This will be part one, and we will finish this episode next week and conclude our breakdown of Gladiator. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined as always by Rob Dunham.
For some reason, I'm dressed as Santa Claus.
Yeah, you do know it's October and not December.
I do,
right?
and I'm vehemently against celebrating Christmas before Thanksgiving. So
apparently you're not.
I think it was just laundry day. That's my only excuse. It's by far the least of the sins I have to atone for in this of the podcast.
Yes, indeed. This is true. Yeah. Random side note, I had a friend whom I believe you know as well, a former roommate of mine, who owned like 3 sets of clothing. So on laundry day, he would wash all of his clothing and wear a flight suit around campus. So whenever he was wearing a flight suit, you knew it was laundry day.
Excellent.
Yeah, just a little anecdote there for you. But this is not a laundry podcast. This is, in fact, a movie podcast. And so we have an excellent show in store for you. We'll, of course, get into the box office and what's there, what's coming up. We are going to spend a significant amount of time revisiting the movie Gladiator. This is a classic movie, and we thought we'd spend some time revisiting it or visiting it. Foreshadowing. We'll, of course, also get into our watch list, and Rob is well into his horror education training here, so he will be breaking that down for us as well. All right, let's get started with the box office. Rob, interesting box office this week. Smile takes home the #1 at the box office. So apparently creepy people behind the home plate at baseball games does in fact work. 22.6 million in its first week in the box office for Smile. Don't Worry Darling came in #2 in its second week. 6.8 million. That's up to 32 million total. The Woman King in week 3, 6.8 million as well. Avatar in its second week of re-release put out 5 million, and Bros in its #1 week 4.9 million. Rob, what'd you make of the box office results from this weekend?
So we have seen, I think, repeatedly now that if you release a horror movie that has good production quality and any kind of advertisement at all, it's pretty much, it looks like it's almost a lock to make $15 to $25 million.
Yeah,
the opening weekend, because it's just a built-in audience for it, and it's not. I mean, that's not a massive number, but the thing that makes it such a functional number and positive for movie studios is very rarely are these movies like budgeted over $5 to $10 million.
Yeah,
so they're almost always making back your budget and then some the opening weekend with these movies.
And what's interesting about that too is one of the ways that the horror movies do so well on the budget is they rarely cast big name actors, because it's not really a necessary part of the genre. You're not relying on star power, you're relying on the emotional experience. So therefore you can save significantly on budget by not having to cast big name actors in most of these horror movies.
Yeah, because it's really more than maybe some other things is the story-driven medium.
Yeah.
I mean, people go to them to be scared, to have some good jump scenes. Ones that are done really well have a good story to go along with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I just got home from watching a movie in the theater that was actually just released for the first time in the theater ever, that came out in 2007. And it was it was a horror movie without any really big names. I mean, the biggest name in it is Brian Cox, who's a decent actor, but he's certainly not like leading man. I mean, if you watch movies, you know who he is, but he's definitely a part character.
Yeah,
he's one of that guy.
He's one of those guys that should have been on our list that one time we did the podcast of like best supporting actors.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was or not, but he should have been.
Yeah, so I mean, this movie that's like probably the biggest name in it was still a really good movie.
Yeah.
And I think when you have the flexibility to spend your budget on maybe writing and direction and set design and things like that, you can create something that's just a little bit divergent, maybe better than some main studio blockbusters that come out.
Yeah, for sure. Seems like Avatar is still. I mean, it was basically cutting a third for week 2. So I don't know what that means for its longevity. I mean, it's still in the top 5, and like it's already, they can basically put it in as long as they want, as long as theaters are okay with showing it. Like, there's no downside.
Yeah,
for it still being there.
I mean, it's still, I think, kind of an accomplishment for a movie that has, first released so long ago that it's still made almost $20 million. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So we'll see. What do you make of Bros in week 1 at 4.9?
Not really surprised with the number, because I think it's a very niche, kind of movie. So
somebody should have told Billy Eichner about that, because what seemed obvious to everybody else apparently wasn't obvious to him.
And I mean, it is what it is. It's a movie for a very specific audience, and I also think there might be some pushback from some of that audience who might be like, "This is really necessary." So I'm wondering where the ground is for this movie. Because I think you're automatically disenfranchising a good like 40 maybe plus % of the population to the movie, and but he made it because he wanted to make it, so I'm sure he was under no illusions of what kind of reception it would get.
I think he's under some illusions based on comments. But hey, there you go. All right. So that's the box office roundup. By the way, just a reference, Top Gun Maverick still made $1.2 million this week.
Yeah. So it made roughly a fifth of a Bros.
Yeah. So like 3 weeks ago, that would have been like tops of the box office with how bad it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago. But yeah. Okay. So we have 2 main releases opening this weekend. The first one is Lyle Lyle Crocodile. This is an interesting looking movie. It's a feature film based on a children's book about a crocodile that lives in New York City. It stars Constance Wu and Javier Bardem. It's kind of an interesting looking kids movie. And second, we have Amsterdam. And Amsterdam is to say it's a cornucopia of high-profile stars. It's in the 1930s, 3 friends witness a murder, are framed for it, and uncover one of the most outrageous plots in American history. And I have to take a deep breath to run through all the cast on this one. Here we go. Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, John David Washington, Alessandra Nivola, Anya Taylor-Joy, Chris Rock, Michael Shannon, Mike Myers, Taylor Swift, Timothy Olyphant, Zoe Saldana, Rami Malek, Robert De Niro. And I think I'll stop there.
Are we sure that Guy Ritchie is not directing this movie? Because
it is, in fact, David O. Russell.
He's the ensemble master. So
he is. So this is one of the ones that I have been waiting for to come out. This was on our fall preview issue a couple of weeks ago. This was one of the ones I was most looking forward to. Rob, what do you make of the releases this week?
I'm definitely more excited about Amsterdam. I still need to get to the theater to watch some of these movies that are coming out. Because
Yeah.
the one movie I saw in the theater this week was released in 2007. So I'm a little behind the times here.
Indeed.
But yeah, it's definitely one I've been looking forward to as well. Always interested to see what a director does with a big ensemble cast because it's in art. And we mentioned Guy Ritchie because I think we unanimously agree that he's the best.
He's very, very good at it.
Getting everything out of every person who's in a movie. And that's the big question when you're making a movie like this. Can you develop enough strong character in each character to make them interesting, to make you care about the trajectory of the character, their own separate plot line? I think another one that did this really well was Knives Out.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there was motivation behind each character. There was something unique about each one that really drew you into the story. So I'm interested to see what David O. Russell does here with these characters because there's a lot of talent.
Yeah.
In that room. So
yeah, and it looks like a very intriguing murder mystery type movie, which is interesting because there's been a few of those type of movies come out recently. We're seeing a kind of return of that type of noir murder mystery genre, which is interesting. Okay. That is what's coming out in the box office. So there's lots of things out in the box office, lots of stuff to go check out. Make sure you hit up the theater this week. All right. And now we get to our discussion portion. And just to give a little bit of background on where this comes from, I was scrolling around TV maybe 2 weeks ago, just looking for something random to watch, and Gladiator was on. And I'm like, oh man, I haven't seen Gladiator in a long time. And I only watched at that moment, I only watched like half hour, 40 minutes of it. I'm like, man, I just, it's been a while and I just forget how good of a movie this is sometimes. And I was watching thinking, oh my goodness, this for me, this is almost a perfect movie. And so that got me thinking, okay, maybe it's time to go revisit this movie. Well, it's time to take a deeper dive into Gladiator. So this has launched me onto a project, which will end up on filmforfans.com, which you'll hear some of the substance of on this discussion. But I did a deep dive revisiting Gladiator, in which I spent about 5 hours going through the movie and logging my thoughts on each and every scene and all the things that stood out and how they mesh together and all the characters and all this type of stuff. So I'm going to shorten that down and produce an article about Gladiator, taking a look at it 20 some years later. So I decided, okay, let's do it. Let's talk about it. So I said, Rob, can you watch Gladiator between last week and this week? And Rob did. However, there was a caveat in this that I was not aware of. Rob, would you like to explain yourself?
Yeah, unbeknownst to Ryan, this was the first time I ever watched Gladiator, which slightly unacceptable considering it's been out for 20 years.
Yeah. Rob had never seen Gladiator until this week, folks. That happened.
Rob had seen a lot of memes about Gladiator, and Rob had heard a lot of quotes from Gladiator without knowing they were actually from Gladiator. And obviously, I'd seen a lot of Russell Crowe in battle armor.
Yeah.
But I had not seen the whole movie. And honestly, it was one where it was never one I felt like I would just pick up and throw on, let's just watch this for fun, because 2.5 hours long, I knew I was in for, something intensive and I wanted to give it my full attention. So I finally had the opportunity to do that this week, and definitely also very impressed with the movie. Mm-hmm. So looking forward to discussing it a bit here.
Yeah. So just to start out, to give you some background on the movie for anyone who like Rob unacceptably has not seen the movie. Basically, it came out in the year 2000. It's about a former Roman general who sets out to exact revenge on the corrupt emperor who murdered his family and sent him into slavery. And it stars Russell Crowe, Joaquin Phoenix, Connie Nielsen, Oliver Reed, Richard Harris are the kind of the main actors on this. Directed by Ridley Scott. Um, it was a massively successful movie. It won 5 Oscars. It was nominated for something like 10 Oscars. It won for Best Picture. It won for Best Actor, Russell Crowe. It won for Best Costume Design. It won for Best Sound and for Best Visual Effects. It was also nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Joaquin Phoenix, which I'll have to go back and look and see who won that because seriously? Anyway, Ridley Scott was nominated for Best Director. He was very ticked off that he did not win this for Best Director.
It's not often that the Best Director and Best Picture go to different people. So
it's true. It's very often that they do, even though in this case I think he has a gripe, but hey, it is what it is. It was nominated for Best Writing, Best Cinematography, Best Filmmaking, Editing, Best Music. Hans Zimmer did the score for this one. Best Art Direction, all that type of stuff. So it was a big movie. So that's kind of our starting block. That was Gladiator as we look at it. So Rob, as we look at it, what do we want to start with? Do we want to start with your assessment of the overall story, or do we want to get into the characters first?
I think we can maybe tackle the story a bit. Obviously, as we from this point forward, if you haven't seen Gladiator, you're gonna have it spoiled for you. So,
indeed.
I found starting with the story.
Mm-hmm.
I found the hero's journey in this movie quite compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I really think one of the best versions of that I've seen on screen, just in character arc and development throughout the movie. You see Russell Crowe's character Maximus go through some major ups and downs, to say the least. To go from the height of leading the military to being sent out to be murdered, to becoming a slave, to becoming the most popular gladiator, the fan favorite, if you would, to being actually murdered. there's a lot there, and I do think that in the end, it can be argued, and I would argue that, even though he died, he won.
Yeah.
That makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that he was in the hearts of the people, which was something that Commodus, Joaquin Phoenix's character, never quite could get, and I don't think ever got.
Yeah.
I found the emotion of the movie to feel very genuine, which we talked about before is a difficult thing to do sometimes with movies. Sometimes it feels like trying to force you to feel emotions with musical cues or way things are lit or whatever. And there is certainly some very clear direction in those ways in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main things I'm thinking of is the color palette shifts in some of the scenes, but I felt like they were effective, not hackneyed or unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you did too much or didn't do them justice, I think could really be a danger. But I didn't feel that way with how they were done in this movie. So that's kind of just some general overall thoughts I had about the movie and how the story progresses and what we see there.
Yeah, when you have a movie with the title of Gladiator, one immediately thinks that what is going to stand out about the movie are going to be the action sequences, the fighting, the battles, the action. And while they are excellently done, this is a story-driven movie. This is a story and a character-driven movie. And what you see is you do not see like a thin papered story layered over basically just to connect different action sequences. What you see is a complex, emotionally driven, multi-layered story that gives the movie a both a grandiose feel and a depth and a sense of meaning to it. This is not something that's really easy to find in high quality action movies. It's one of the reasons why it was able to be considered Best Picture. Of course, this is also has something to do with where the awards were at that time, and it was less about the awards kind of looking down on the audience. This is back in a time when a popular movie could actually win Best Picture. But the reason why it was able to be considered is because of the level of the story, the journey of the characters. The It's not just a story about a single individual. It's a story about multiple characters coming from multiple sides who have well written, round, complex motivations, and all of it kind of coalesces. So you have all the characters right there at the beginning, and then they all get flung out into different spaces, and then slowly they work themselves back together until you have this culmination. And the movie shifts in tone at various points. You have the initial flurry of action where Marcus Aurelius is killed, and Maximus, the attempted murder of Maximus. Then you have that long middle where Maximus is out in the outer territories fighting in gladiator arenas, and Commodus is, honing in on his power inside Rome. And then by the time they work themselves back together, then the political intrigue aspect starts. And it's just, as the story comes along, you have different things to chew on, different experiences, and it really makes for just a story that just keeps growing as you go through it.
One thing I found interesting, and you said that you highly recommend the director's cut of this movie, is that for a 2.5 hour long movie, it felt almost short to me. Like, it felt like there was way more that could have been done. And obviously, I'm assuming a lot of that is displayed in his vision, the director's cut of the movie.
It's actually, what I will say is, it's actually an extended edition and not a director's cut.
Okay.
He explains that at the beginning. He was like, this is not the director. He actually got what he wanted in the original film, but he thought there were other things that he wanted to put in there, as opposed to another Ridley Scott film, Kingdom of Heaven, in which he created a director's cut. And at the beginning of that one, he explains, this is the movie how it should have been. So yeah, that is one distinct difference.
That's a fascinating distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, and there were aspects that they didn't get a chance to go to, and this is one of the things with, if you have seen the extended edition, Ridley Scott makes the claim that the reason why some of the other political intrigue, and particular some of the stuff that got cut, was Connie Nielsen's Lucilla character. A lot of her behind the scenes role were explicated in the extended edition. The reason they cut some of that out was because they wanted the movie to focus around the character of Maximus. And when they went too far afield of doing that, he felt like that would take away from the story. Yeah. And this, maybe we'll use this as a segue into the characters. One of the things that I think drives this movie is the triad of Commodus, Lucilla, Maximus. That triad relationship between those three characters and how complex that back and forth is really what drives this entire movie. Commodus is jealous of Maximus. Maximus had a falling out and a previous relationship with Lucilla. There's that complex brother-sister relationship between Commodus and Lucilla. And all of that tension between those relationships is what drives the story forward. That, and then you add on top of it uh, the Marcus Aurelius character, how his role is small because he's only at the very beginning of the movie, but it's his actions that kind of set the entire thing in motion. Some of which you see on screen, and some of which you just infer as to how the characters talk as to what has happened previously.
Yeah, so I would say that that is a fascinating dynamic, like you said, between the three characters, because it's a love triangle in that each of them loves one of the other ones, but they don't all love the same person.
Yeah.
And apologies to anyone who's watching the podcast from Alabama, but holy Alabama Batman. I don't think we have any listeners from Alabama, so I think I'm safe to say that. Yeah, I find it really, really fascinating and unnerving a bit. What like you said, Joaquin Phoenix deserves plaudits for just entirely how creepy he is in this movie. Because he plays the creepiness with earnestness, which makes it like really way more creepy.
Yeah. And if you know anything about Roman history, his character really rings true based on what you know about some of previous Roman emperors. I mean, they're like, this is a character that really could have existed during the time of the Roman Empire. But this was my first introduction to Joaquin Phoenix. I know he had been in some stuff previously, but I think this was his biggest role to date, if I'm not mistaken. And this, I mean, we now come to accept Joaquin Phoenix as one of the greatest actors of his generation. But this was really the role where everyone was like, okay, all right, this is a performance.
Yeah, and I think that Russell Crowe also it's just phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
This movie, well deserving of the best actor, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the tension of Lucilla's character is maybe one of the most fascinating aspects of
It is.
the movie, because obviously she doesn't want to be with her brother because she's creeped out by that. But at the same time, she obviously doesn't want to die, and she doesn't want to be completely stripped of what little power she might have. So there's not much of an option for her in this culture as to what to do. But at the same time, she yearns to be with Maximus. So what do you do in those moments? What kind of choice can you even make? A lot of the agency is taken away from her based on, like I said, the culture that she was living in, the time period that she was living in. And you mentioned Marcus Aurelius' character and how he's only really in the first 20-30 minutes of the movie because he's killed, but the movie doesn't exist without his character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he's literally the motivation for every other main character
to
do what they do. I mean, as much as Maximus is also driven by revenge to avenge his family. The reason why he was cast out and murdered, or they attempted to murder him and they murdered his family in the first place, was because of the decision that Marcus Aurelius had made to place him in control to make him emperor. So without that initial decision, none of that would have happened.
Yeah.
So it really all goes back to that character, and he therefore drives the motivation of everyone else throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and Richard Harris is brilliant, as Richard Harris always is in this role. But he plays this weary leader at the end of his life, concerned about his legacy. But it's really his own failures that set in motion the world that was created in this movie. And what's interesting, he portrays a very sympathetic character. Like you feel for him, you feel sympathy for him as a character. Yet he has pretty amazing flaws in this one. He spends his entire life on one aspect of legacy, gets to the end of his life and realizes, you know what? This probably wasn't what I should have been pursuing. I should have been doing something else. Um, but but then for him to understand on some level who his son Commodus is. At one point he says Commodus is not a moral man. He understands this. He doesn't want him to rule. He rules against him. At the same point, he's wildly naive about what his son is actually going to do with this. I mean, he doesn't tell anybody else other than Maximus about what his plans are. He tells Commodus alone in his tent. And at one point he even appears shocked that Commodus is upset about the decision. And so it's weird. It's like he knows who his son is, but he's wildly naive about his son's ambitions, which is an interesting juxtaposition. And the whole idea that Marcus Aurelius loved Maximus as a son and not Commodus as a son, is one of the major motivations throughout the entire movie. It's one of the major things that plays out from this, which we can get to a little bit more once we get to the character of Commodus. Anything more? You started in on Lucilla. Any more you want to talk about with her character?
I felt that I just feel that she played that taut emotional tightrope she was walking on incredibly. I felt like you could feel a lot of that internal turmoil in her, in the facial expressions of the character, not necessarily in what she said, which I made it so effective. I think especially of the one scene where they're in the bed chamber and she like walks out after he had just laid next to her and like laid his head on her chest, and you could see her walking out like her arms folded and just the expression on her face of what do I do?
Yeah.
I felt it was very effective.
I think she is one of the best, most dynamic female characters I've ever seen in the movie, because she has her strengths, she has her weaknesses, she has this complex world that she's having to walk through. As you were saying, she has to walk the tightrope literally the entire movie, and she has all these different motivations. Kind of like her brother, she has a Machiavellian side. She has the manipulative political mind. Marcus Aurelius says at the beginning, if only you'd been born a man, what a Caesar you would have made. And that really illustrates like the depth to which her character has all the leadership abilities that her brother lacks, but is held back because of her role in society. But at the same time, like, she's the one having to control her brother, both for the sake of the Roman Empire, but also for the sake of herself and her son. And that juxtaposition of her son versus, trying to protect her son, trying to protect herself, trying to protect the kingdom at the same time, like because of that Machiavellian side, because she will do what it takes to survive. She lives in a world that's gray, and Maximus lives in a world that's black and white. And you can tell this is one of the reasons why he doesn't trust her, because she's so good at keeping herself out of trouble. It makes her difficult to trust. And you see that, and you get that, and you see that tension. So there's multiple scenes where she's having to try and convince somebody that she can be trusted, Maximus on several occasions, and it's hard for her because of that. And so what she has to do to survive is also one of the obstacles to her actually surviving, which that kind of level of writing of character, and you're totally right. Her character plays the facial expression so well, especially in conjunction with Joaquin Phoenix. So what do we make of Commodus?
I think that he is a slimy, nasty, underhanded son of a,
Yeah.
And I think that Joaquin Phoenix plays that to a T. Because he lot of the things he says sound okay, I guess, but there's always something underneath it, and I think that there's something tonally about that character that, like I said, Joaquin pulls off.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure how many other actors could have that nuance in the character, because I mean he's not outrightly coming out all the time being like I'm gonna kill everyone, but like, you know, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out a little bit at a time. But he's just like smarmy and self-satisfied, and he's just a really good bad guy.
Yeah. What's so awesome about how they write his character is there are moments where you almost feel a sympathy for him, which for a character as creepy and slimy, like the moment where he finds out that he's not going to rule. He hasn't done anything super terrible yet. You know, I mean, you see him playing the political game, and you see his naked ambition, his lust for power up to that point, but you don't necessarily see that he has done anything evil yet. And so there's a moment where you almost feel for him as he's realizing that his father doesn't want him to rule, and what's more, that his father doesn't love him as much as he loves Maximus. There's almost a moment where you feel sympathy for him. Of course, then he immediately proceeds to smother his aging father, and then it's all gone. But you can get that. And so what's fascinating is, you know, he is also Machiavellian, but unlike Lucilla, he has the sociopath element along with it. Of course, he's amoral, he's authoritarian, he's mentally unstable. He's got all of these. And what's so fascinating is all of his motivations are have that negative side. Like he's unloved by his father, he's spurned by his sister, who he's got the desires for. You know, he's got this rival in Maximus, who is everything he would love to be but isn't. Um, on top of that, he's got the ambition side, and he knows just enough about the politics to be dangerous. And you know, his motivation is interestingly complex because, you know, throughout the movie, he's talking about, oh, we'll do this in my father's honor. We'll do this in my father's honor. So there's a sense in which he wants to honor his father. At the same time, like everything he's doing to honor his father is a direct tearing down of what his father would have wanted and his father's legacy. So you can see the complexity in his motivations as he's going about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so great. And that hinging on the levels of mental instability and that wild mood swings, man, Joaquin Phoenix is good at that.
Maybe because he's a little bit like that in real life.
Yeah. 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 And that concludes part one of our Gladiator Revisited podcast. Stay tuned for next week, where we break down our favorite scenes from the movie and all the other extras that go along with it.